The morning mist hung thick over the Ardennes forest on December 16th, 1944, as Private Tommy Henderson peered through the frosted window of his foxhole near the Belgian-German border. The silence was unnerving, too quiet for a war zone where American forces had grown comfortable in what they believed was a quiet sector. Henderson couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. For weeks, the Allied High Command had dismissed reports of German troop movements in the dense forests of the Eifel region. General Omar Bradley had confidently declared the Ardennes as a calculated risk, believing the Germans lacked the strength for a major offensive. The American First Army's 8th Corps, stretched thin across an 85-mile front, maintained only a light defensive posture. Fresh recruits and battle-weary veterans recovering from previous campaigns populated the foxholes and bunkers scattered throughout the seemingly peaceful woodland. Intelligence reports from the Office of Strategic Services had indicated unusual German radio silence and troop concentrations. But these warnings were largely ignored by Allied commanders, who believed Nazi Germany was on its last legs. The successful D-Day landings at Normandy in June had opened the Western Front, while Soviet forces pressed relentlessly from the east. Paris had been liberated in August, and Allied forces had crossed into Germany itself. Victory seemed inevitable, and the Christmas season of 1944 felt like it might be the last Christmas of the war. The German plan was audacious in its scope and timing. 3 Armees, the 6th Panzer Army under SSA Burst Gruppenführer Joseph Sepp Dietrich, the 5th Panzer Army commanded by General Hasso von Manteuffel, and the 7th Army led by General Erich Brandenberger, would punch through the thinly defended Ardennes sector. The offensive aimed to reach the Meuse River within 48 hours and Antwerp within a week, catching the Allies completely off guard during the harsh winter weather that would ground Allied air support. As dawn broke on that fateful December morning, Henderson noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the lifting mist, he could see movement in the tree line across the valley knot, the usual patrol activity. But something much larger and more ominous. The sound of distant artillery pieces being positioned echoed through the forest, followed by the unmistakable rumble of tank engines. The German Wehrmacht was preparing to unleash hell upon the unsuspecting American positions. According to reports later documented by war correspondent Ernie Pyle, the initial signs of the impending offensive were subtle, but telling increased German reconnaissance flights. Unusual radio chatter intercepted by Allied listening posts. And the strange disappearance of German civilians from border villages. These pieces of the puzzle, when assembled after the fact, painted a clear picture of the massive military operation that was about to commence. At 0530 hours, the morning silence was shattered by the roar of over 1,600 German artillery pieces opening fire simultaneously along the entire front. The largest artillery barrage on the Western Front since D-Day had begun, marking the start of what would become known as Hitler's last great gamble in the West. The earth trembled beneath Henderson's feet as German shells rained down with terrifying precision across the American lines. The carefully planned artillery barrage lasting nearly 2 hours targeted communication centers, supply depots, and command posts with devastating accuracy. In those first moments of December 16th, the illusion of a quiet sector evaporated as American soldiers scrambled for cover in their frozen foxholes. Sergeant Mike O'Sullivan of the 28th Infantry Division's 110th Regiment found himself shouting orders over the deafening explosions as his men struggled to maintain their positions near the village of Clairvaux in Luxembourg. The veteran NCO, who had survived the Normandy beaches and the fighting in the Hurtgen forest, had never experienced such an intense bombardment. As the shells fell, he could hear the distinctive sound of German tanks approaching through the snow-covered forest roads. The German 6th Panzer Army, spearheaded by the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, crashed into the positions held by the inexperienced 99th Infantry Division near the village of Heffon. Elite SS troops, many of them hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, brought with them the latest German armor, including King Tiger tanks and Panther tanks that outgunned most Allied equipment. The surprise was complete American units reported German paratroopers dropping behind their lines, while armored columns punched through defensive positions that had been considered impregnable. Colonel Hurley Fuller, commanding the 110th Infantry Regiment, desperately tried to coordinate his scattered battalions as German forces surrounded key positions. His regiment, already under strength and spread across a 25-mile front, faced the full might of the German 5th Panzer Army. The Americans fought with remarkable tenacity, despite being outnumbered 3-1. But the sheer weight of the German assault began to tell, as villages fell one by one to the advancing Wehrmacht. In the northern sector, the German advance encountered unexpected resistance from the 2nd Infantry Division and elements of the 99th Infantry Division at the twin villages of Recherith and Krinkelt. These fresh American troops, many experiencing combat for the first time, stood their ground against repeated attacks by SS Panzer divisions. The fighting was savage and close quarters, with American bazookas crews crawling through the snow to get close enough to German armor to make their weapons effective. The German plan began to show signs of strain as American resistance proved more stubborn than anticipated. Hitler's timetable called for German forces to reach the Meuse River by December 18th, but the fierce defense of key road junctions and villages was already causing significant delays. The narrow forest roads, clogged with snow and German vehicles, created massive traffic jams that prevented the rapid exploitation of initial breakthroughs. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, received urgent orders to begin moving his Sherman tanks northward toward the embattled region. The Allied response was beginning to mobilize, but it would take time to redirect forces from other sectors of the front. Meanwhile, German commanders pressed their advantage, knowing that success depended on maintaining momentum before Allied reserves could arrive. Weather conditions favored the German offensive, with thick clouds preventing Allied air support from intervening effectively. The Luftwaffe, making one of its last significant appearances of the war, managed to provide limited air cover for the advancing ground forces. German fighter pilots flying the new Messerschmitt 262 jet fighters alongside traditional propeller aircraft challenged Allied air superiority for the first time in months. As reported in later accounts by Stars and Stripes correspondent Andy Rooney, the initial German success created panic in some Allied rear areas, with supply units and headquarters personnel fleeing westward in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge Blues. However, frontline American units continued to fight with determination, buying precious time for the Allied High Command to organize an effective response to Hitler's surprise offensive. By nightfall on December 16th, German forces had penetrated up to 6 miles into Allied lines at several points, creating the distinctive bulge in the front lines that would give the battle its popular name. Dawn on December 17th brought no relief to the beleaguered American forces as German armor continued to exploit the gaps torn in Allied lines. The picturesque Belgian town of Bastogne, a vital crossroads that controlled 7 major highways converging in the Ardennes region, found itself directly in the path of the German 5th Panzer Army's advance. What happened next would become one of the most celebrated episodes of American military valor in the Second World War. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, arrived in Bastogne just as German forces were beginning to surround the strategic town. The paratroopers of the Screaming Eagles, still recovering from their costly victory in Operation Market Garden in Holland, had been hastily loaded onto trucks and rushed to the Ardennes without adequate winter equipment or sufficient ammunition. McAuliffe's men, along with elements of the 10th Armored Division and various support units, would soon find themselves completely cut off from friendly forces. The German plan called for Bastogne to fall quickly, allowing armored spearheads to continue their race to the Meuse River. However, the American defenders had other ideas. Captain James Parker of the 10th Armored Division's Combat Command positioned his Sherman tanks at key road intersections around the town, while paratroopers dug defensive positions in the frozen ground. The temperature had dropped to well below freezing, and many American soldiers lacked proper winter clothing. But their determination remained unshaken. Meanwhile, 30 miles to the north, the village of St. Vith became another crucial strongpoint in the American defense. Brigadier General Robert Hasbrook's 7th Armored Division, along with remnants of the shattered 106th Infantry Division, transformed the small Belgian town into a fortress that blocked German access to vital road networks. The defense of St. Vith would prove almost as important as the more famous stand at Bastogne, though it received far less attention in subsequent histories of the battle. The German advance created numerous pockets of surrounded American troops throughout the Ardennes, At the village of Huffeles, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Hill's tank battalion found itself cut off, but continued to fight, launching desperate counterattacks against German positions. Near Wiltz, elements of the 28th Infantry Division held their positions for days against overwhelming odds, inflicting heavy casualties on advancing German units before finally being overrun. Colonel Joachim Peiper, commanding the 1st SS Panzer Division's spearhead Kampftruppe, achieved the deepest German penetration of the offensive when his battle group reached the village of Stoumont, just 4 miles from a major fuel depot at Spa. Peiper's advance represented the high-water mark of German success, but his isolated position left him vulnerable to American counterattacks. The SS colonel's brutal treatment of American prisoners at Malmedy and other locations would later make him one of the most wanted war criminals of the conflict. Back at Bastogne, the situation grew increasingly desperate as German forces completed their encirclement of the town on December 20th. Supply drops by C-47 transport aircraft provided some relief, but many loads fell into German hands due to poor visibility and enemy anti-aircraft fire. American artillery units, particularly the 969th Field Artillery Battalion, provided crucial fire support despite severe shortages of ammunition. According to accounts published in Time magazine immediately after the war, the German commander of the 47th Panzer Corps, General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, sent a formal surrender demand to the American garrison at Bastogne on December 22nd. General McAuliffe's famous one-word reply, "Nuts," became an instant symbol of American defiance and determination. The German officers who received this response required an explanation of the colloquial American expression, leading to one of the war's most memorable diplomatic exchanges. The weather began to clear slightly on December 23rd, allowing Allied fighter bombers to begin attacking German supply lines and armor concentrations. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs, flying from bases in France and England, struck German columns throughout the Ardennes, disrupting the offensive's momentum and providing much-needed morale support to surrounded American units. December 23rd marked a crucial turning point in the Battle of the Bulge, as clearing skies finally allowed the Allied air forces to enter the fight with devastating effectiveness. General Georges Patton's Third Army, executing one of the most remarkable military maneuvers in modern warfare history, had pivoted 90 degrees from their positions in the Saar region and were racing northward to relieve the surrounded garrison at Bastogne. The flamboyant general's ability to redirect an entire army in the middle of winter demonstrated the logistical superiority that would ultimately doom the German offensive. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, leading the vanguard of the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command B, pushed his tanks through snow-covered roads toward Bastogne despite fierce German resistance. Abrams, who would later become the United States Army Chief of Staff, drove his men relentlessly forward, knowing that every hour of delay meant more casualties among the trapped paratroopers. His Sherman tanks engaged German panzers in running battles through the Belgian countryside, leaving burning vehicles scattered along the route to the besieged town. The German offensive was beginning to show critical weaknesses that Allied commanders were quick to exploit. Fuel shortages plagued German armored units, many of which had been counting on capturing American supply depots to continue their advance. The elaborate German plan to use English-speaking commandos in American uniforms, known as Operation Grief, and led by SS Obersturmbannführer Skorzeny, created temporary confusion but ultimately failed to achieve its objectives of capturing key bridges and spreading panic among Allied forces. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding the northern sector of the Bulge, began organizing a coordinated counterattack using the British 30th Corps and American units that had been placed under his temporary command. The controversial decision to place American troops under British command caused significant tension among Allied leaders, but it proved militarily sound as Montgomery's methodical approach helped stabilize the northern shoulder of the German penetration. At St. Vith, the gallant defense finally collapsed on December 21st, as overwhelming German pressure forced the American garrison to withdraw. However, the 6-day delay imposed on German timetables by the defenders of this crucial road junction had irreparably damaged Hitler's ambitious schedule for reaching Antwerp. The sacrifice of these units bought precious time for Allied reserves to arrive and organize effective countermeasures. Colonel Piper's Kampfgruppe, still the deepest German penetration, found itself increasingly isolated and running low on fuel and ammunition. American forces, coordinated by Major General Matthew Ridgway's 18th Airborne Corps, began systematically reducing the German salient from multiple directions. Piper's elite SS troops, accustomed to rapid advances and quick victories, were learning the harsh realities of fighting a defensive battle against superior numbers and firepower. The massacre of American prisoners at Malmedy by Piper's troops became known to Allied forces throughout the Ardennes, stiffening resistance and reducing the likelihood of German troops receiving quarter in subsequent fighting, according to accounts later published in the Washington Post. This atrocity galvanized American determination and contributed to the fierce fighting that characterized the remainder of the battle. Weather conditions on December 23 allowed for the largest single day of Allied air operations since the beginning of the offensive. Over 2,000 Allied aircraft attacked German positions, supply lines, and troop concentrations throughout the battle area. The German Luftwaffe, making its final major effort of the war, lost over 300 aircraft in desperate attempts to provide air cover for ground forces. The air battle over the Ardennes effectively marked the end of German air power as a significant factor in the war. General Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, met with his principal subordinates at Verdun on December 19 to coordinate the Allied response. The decision to place Patton's Third Army and Montgomery's northern forces on the offensive while maintaining the defense of key positions, like Bastogne, demonstrated the strategic flexibility that characterized successful Allied operations throughout the war. Eisenhower's calm leadership during this crisis helped maintain coalition unity, despite the severe strains imposed by the German surprise attack. The morning of December 26, 1944, dawned cold and clear over the Belgian countryside as the sounds of battle echoed across the snow-covered fields surrounding Bastogne. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams' lead Sherman tank, nicknamed Cobra King, crashed through the German perimeter and made contact with the 101st Airborne Division's defensive positions at 4:50 in the afternoon. The siege of Bastogne was broken, but the battle for the Ardennes was far from over. General McAuliffe greeted his rescuers with characteristic understatement, reportedly telling Abrams, "Glad to see you." The relief of Bastogne provided a tremendous morale boost to Allied forces throughout the theater, but German commanders were not ready to abandon their offensive. Elements of the German 6th Panzer Army launched renewed attacks against American positions near Bastogne, determined to recapture the vital crossroads and salvage something from their faltering offensive. The German High Command was becoming increasingly desperate, as reports from the Eastern Front indicated that Soviet forces were preparing a massive winter offensive that would begin in January. Hitler's gamble in the West was consuming reserves that would soon be desperately needed to defend the Reich itself. Nevertheless, the Führer refused to authorize a withdrawal from the Ardennes, ordering his commanders to continue attacking despite mounting losses and dwindling supplies. Colonel Piper's isolated Kampfgruppe finally abandoned their vehicles and equipment near the village of Le Gleize on December 24th, escaping on foot through American lines under cover of darkness. The elimination of this dangerous German spearhead removed the deepest penetration of the offensive and allowed American forces to begin systematic reduction of the bulge from the north. Piper's retreat marked the end of German hopes for reaching the Meuse River and effectively signaled the failure of Operation Watch on the Rhine. General Patton's Third Army continued to expand the corridor to Bastogne, while simultaneously launching attacks toward the east to reduce the southern shoulder of the German salient. The 87th Infantry Division, fighting in combat for the first time, distinguished itself in attacks near Tillet and St. Hubert, proving that American industrial capacity could produce not only superior equipment, but also well-trained soldiers capable of defeating veteran German units. The weather remained clear, allowing Allied air forces to maintain their devastating attacks on German supply lines and troop concentrations. C-47 transport aircraft resumed regular supply drops to isolated American units throughout the Ardennes, while fighter bombers ranged freely over the battlefield, attacking anything that moved during daylight hours. The German army, which had counted on bad weather to neutralize Allied air superiority, found itself increasingly vulnerable to air attack as the offensive continued. Montgomery's forces in the northern sector began their own offensive operations on January 3, 1945, striking German positions with methodical precision. The British 30th Corps, reinforced with American armored units, advanced slowly but steadily against determined German resistance. The contrast between Montgomery's careful approach and Patton's aggressive tactics demonstrated the flexibility of Allied command arrangements. With each general employing methods suited to their sector's conditions, intelligence reports indicated that German morale was beginning to crack under the strain of sustained combat and supply shortages. Prisoner interrogations revealed widespread pessimism among German soldiers, many of whom expressed doubts about their ability to sustain the offensive much longer. The German army's reputation for discipline and effectiveness remained formidable, but the cumulative effects of years of warfare were taking their toll on even elite units. American forces launched a coordinated counteroffensive on January 16, 1945, exactly 1 month after the German surprise attack began. The First and Third Armies attacked simultaneously from north and south, aiming to pinch off the remaining German salient and destroy the forces still trapped within the bulge. The fighting remained fierce as German units conducted a series of delaying actions while attempting to withdraw their heavy equipment and personnel to defensive positions along the German border. As documented in reports by Edward R. Murrow of CBS News, the final phase of the Ardennes battle demonstrated the transformation of the American army from the uncertain force that had landed in North Africa in 1942 to the confident, well-equipped military machine that was now driving toward Berlin. The lessons learned in the snowy forests of Belgium would prove invaluable in the final campaigns of the European War. January 28, 1945 marked the official end of the Battle of the Bulge as American forces from the First and Third Armies linked up near the town of Houffalize, effectively eliminating the German salient that had once threatened to split the Allied front. The final weeks of the battle had been characterized by a series of German delaying actions, as Hitler's forces attempted to preserve their remaining strength while withdrawing to the Siegfried Line defenses along the German border. The human cost of Hitler's last gamble had been enormous on both sides. American casualties exceeded 80,000 men, including nearly 20,000 killed, making the Ardennes offensive the costliest battle in United States Army history. German losses were equally severe, with an estimated 100,000 casualties and the destruction of much of Germany's remaining mobile reserves. More critically for the German war effort, the offensive had consumed irreplaceable stocks of fuel, ammunition, and experienced personnel that could never be replaced. General Heinrich Himmler, in his capacity as commander of Army Group Upper Rhine, attempted to launch a diversionary offensive in Alsace to prevent Allied forces from being transferred to the Ardennes. Operation North Wind began on January 1st, but achieved only limited success against French and American defenders. The failure of this supporting attack further demonstrated the German army's declining capabilities and the effectiveness of Allied defensive preparations. The German army, stripped of its mobile reserves, proved incapable of conducting effective defensive operations against the massive Soviet steamroller that was now approaching the Reich's heartland. Colonel Charles MacDonald of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, who would later become one of the battle's most respected historians, participated in the final phases of the fighting around the village of Wiltz. MacDonald's first-hand account of the German withdrawal described enemy soldiers were increasingly demoralized and poorly equipped, a sharp contrast to the confident SS troops who had spearheaded the initial assault. The transformation of German military effectiveness over the course of 6 weeks provided a microcosm of the Reich's declining fortunes. American unit cohesion and leadership had proven superior to German equivalents. Despite the initial tactical surprise achieved by the offensive, junior officers and non-commissioned officers had demonstrated remarkable initiative and adaptability when faced with unprecedented challenges. The performance of units like the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne and the improvised defense of St. Vith became part of United States Army legend and established benchmarks for military excellence that endure today. The logistical achievement represented by the Allied response to the German offensive was perhaps even more impressive than the tactical victory itself. American supply organizations had managed to redirect enormous quantities of men, equipment, and supplies to the Ardennes while maintaining operations in other sectors of the front. The famous Red Ball Express, truck convoy system worked around the clock to keep ammunition and fuel flowing to frontline units. Despite winter weather and enemy interdiction attempts, Allied intelligence services conducted extensive post-battle analysis to understand how German preparations for such a massive offensive had gone undetected. The findings led to significant improvements in intelligence collection and analysis procedures that would benefit Allied operations in the final months of the war. Winston Churchill's assessment of the battle, delivered to Parliament in January 1945, praised American resilience and leadership while acknowledging skill displayed by German commanders in organizing and executing such an ambitious operation under difficult circumstances. The British Prime Minister's comments helped maintain Allied unity during a period when tensions between American and British commanders had threatened coalition effectiveness. According to contemporaneous reporting in the New York Times, the victory in the Ardennes restored confidence among Allied populations that had been shaken by news of the German offensive's initial success. The dramatic story of surrounded American units fighting against overwhelming odds captured public imagination and provided a morale boost during the war's final winter. By February 1st, 1945, the guns had finally fallen silent in the Ardennes forest as the last German units completed their withdrawal across the Aar River into Germany proper. The snow-covered battlefield, littered with the debris of modern warfare, bore witness to one of the most significant military campaigns of the Second World War. What had begun as Hitler's desperate gamble to change the course of the war had ended as a decisive Allied victory that hastened the Third Reich's inevitable collapse. The transformation of the American soldier during the 6 weeks of fighting had been remarkable to witness. Men like Private Tommy Henderson, who had trembled in his foxhole during the opening German bombardment, had become hardened veterans capable of standing their ground against Germany's elite formations. The citizen soldiers of the United States had proven themselves worthy heirs to the Continental Army that had endured the winter at Valley Forge, demonstrating that American democracy could produce warriors equal to any challenge. General Dwight Eisenhower's handling of the crisis had validated his appointment as Supreme Allied commander and demonstrated the leadership qualities that would later make him President of the United States. His ability to maintain coalition unity while coordinating the complex military response to the German offensive showed that Allied cooperation could overcome even the most severe challenges. The battle had tested the Western Alliance and found it stronger than its enemies had dared to hope. The German army's performance during the offensive had been its last credible display of military competence. Units like the 1st SS Panzer Division and the elite parachute formations had fought with their traditional skill and determination. But the institutional knowledge and experience that had made the Wehrmacht so formidable were irreplaceable losses. The cream of German military leadership had been expended in a futile attempt to postpone the inevitable reckoning with Allied industrial and numerical superiority. Hitler's decision to launch the Ardennes offensive would be remembered as one of history's great strategic blunders. The resources committed to Operation Watch on the Rhine could have significantly strengthened German defenses against the impending Soviet winter offensive. Instead, the Reich's last mobile reserves had been squandered in the Belgian forests, leaving Germany's eastern frontiers virtually defenseless against Stalin's advancing legions. The tactical innovations developed during the battle influenced military doctrine for decades to come. American combined arms techniques, integrating infantry, armor, artillery, and air support, proven superior to German operational methods that relied heavily on breakthrough and exploitation. The coordination between different service branches that characterized Allied operations in the Ardennes became the standard for modern military organizations worldwide. Medical advances achieved during the treatment of battle casualties, particularly in the management of cold weather injuries and battlefield trauma, saved thousands of lives and established protocols still used by military medical services today. The harsh winter conditions had presented unique challenges that led to innovations in field medicine and casualty evacuation procedures. The battle's impact on civilian populations in the affected regions was profound and long-lasting. Belgian and Luxembourg civilians had endured occupation, liberation, reoccupation, and liberation again within the space of a few months. Their resilience and support for Allied forces, despite enormous hardships, demonstrated the moral foundations upon which the Allied cause rested. American war production, already operating at unprecedented levels, responded to the lessons learned in the Ardennes by accelerating development of improved winter clothing, more effective infantry, anti-tank weapons, and enhanced communications equipment. The industrial capacity that had made Allied victory possible continued to evolve in response to combat experience. Ensuring technological superiority in future conflicts, the international implications of the Allied victory extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. The demonstration of American military competence and Allied unity provided a foundation for the post-war international order. It would emerge from the ashes of the Third Reich. The leadership and organizational abilities displayed during the crisis would prove essential in managing the complex challenges of post-war reconstruction and the emerging Cold War with the Soviet Union. As spring returned to the Ardennes in 1945, the forest began to heal from the wounds of war. The American soldiers who had stood fast against Hitler's last gamble had written a chapter in military history that would inspire future generations facing their own moments of crisis and decision. Sources and references. This narrative draws upon official U.S. Army historical records, contemporary reports from Stars and Stripes, Time magazine, and the New York Times, as well as post-war accounts by participants including Generals Eisenhower, Patton, and McAuliffe. Additional context provided by the work of military historians Charles MacDonald and Hugh Cole.